A game that redefined the scope of storytelling and presentation within the industry, Metal Gear Solid. Considered a classic and one of the best games of all time created by the industry genius Hideo Kojima for the PlayStation 1. But the path to build Metal Gear Solid was one that changed throughout its development, from moving development through different platforms to developing a successful formula and translating a classic 2D franchise into the third dimension. And so today, we shall explore the complete history and beta unused content of Metal Gear Solid. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe button and hit the like button too to further support us and keep creating new videos. 1994, an era where the advent of 3D gaming was coming into clear focus, with PCs, the SNES, to even the 32X add-on offering it to an extent. During that very year, one of Konami's top directors, Hideo Kojima, was busy with his latest game, Policenauts, a visual novel-like adventure game for the PC 9821. Seeing this very clear direction the industry was going, Kojima started to plan out his next game, a return to Metal Gear. At this point, 3 Metal Gear games existed on the market: Metal Gear for the MSX and the NES, Metal Gear 2 for the MSX, and the spin-off Snake's Revenge for the NES, which was not made by Kojima. Kojima's intent to return to the franchise was one that he knew he had to return to, as it was his breakout game, and wished to better evolve the stealth mechanic in the third dimension. All of them were top-down 2D stealth games, and like with many other series that were being challenged to bring their 2D series to 3D, this was Kojima's new challenge that started planning while in mid-development of Policenauts. Initially, he was planning for the game to be a remake of the first Metal Gear on the MSX, but decided ultimately on a sequel called Metal Gear 3. Policenauts, while it was being developed for the PC 9821, had plans to also port the game on one of the earliest 3D consoles on the market, the 3DO. Having to already be working on this console, Kojima's Metal Gear 3 was as such also now being planned for it. In fact, with Konami releasing a demo disc for Policenauts called Pilot Disc, it contained concept art for Kojima's next game already. These included an early take on the seriously Solid Snake, a new female character called Meryl Silverberg, who also happened to be a character in Policenauts, and a very early look at a group of intimidating figures known as Foxhound. However, while all this was happening, Sony had also revealed a new console, the PlayStation, being a fully robust 3D console with large storage and a lot of potential. Kojima was impressed by this very machine, and by 1995, the ill-fated 3DO was not performing well at all, and looked like it would collapse any day now. As such, Kojima and Konami decided to shift the game to this very new console, the PlayStation. Kojima, who had promised himself to make this new Metal Gear for it, worked to port Policenauts once more to this very console. A good way of learning the ropes with developing for it. But soon, by mid-1995, full-on development for this new Metal Gear 3 began, with a team of only 20 people, which would be considered an oddity for what Konami was penning as a major project. But it was what Kojima preferred, as he could better work with such a small team and better tell his team's condition. However, the game was soon retitled as Metal Gear Solid. This was all due to the fact that Metal Gear 1 and 2 weren't very well known games in the West, with 2 in fact staying exclusively on the MSX in Japan. The usage of Solid in place, while obviously a nod to the series' protagonist, was also Kojima's push for the direction the series was going in, the third dimension. But alas, this was all about to happen during the transition of 2D to 3D in the market, where series either saw themselves flourish to new heights not ever seen before, such as Super Mario 64, or go into an absolute blunder like Konami's other series Castlevania did in transition. As such, Kojima had a tough feat to make sure it transitioned smoothly. Being a series that utilized guns, first person was an idea that came up to better present the 3D nature of the game. But being that this was a stealth game, it was deemed too hard to control. As such, the idea was quite simple. Take the formula of Metal Gear 2 and make it 3D. In other words, the camera would stay overhead for a bulk of the action, meanwhile switching to more angled or even first-person perspectives on occasion to better showcase the 3D world. This all being planned by Kojima's ingenious plan of using Lego blocks and action figures to model the game's various maps to see how the camera would look and plan accordingly. And that was the idea that Kojima and the team wanted to present, a believable 3-dimensional world, with Kojima even stating, if the player isn't tricked into believing that the world is real, then there's no point in making the game. To fulfill this, adjustments were made to every detail, such as individually designed desks. In other words, making it accurate to real-life physics. Whether it be enemies seeing Snake in their cone of vision, to even being able to hear him knock on walls or walk on metal. This even came down to the game's weaponry, which Kojima hired a weapons expert by the name of Motosada Mori as technical advisor to better hone their research. This going so far as to even visiting Stembridge gun rentals and Fort Erin, and even going further over the top by working with the Huntington Beach SWAT team in order to better understand weapons, vehicles, and even explosives through demonstration. With the world at work, Hideo Kojima had tasked artist Yoji Shinkawa, who had earlier drawn those very concept pieces found in the demo disc of Policenauts, to now design the characters, weapons, and of course Metal Gear itself. Much as how Kojima and level designers were using Lego to build the maps in real life, Shinkawa used plastic models to build props and hardware of the game before drawing them out, let alone making clay models of these very characters that he'd provide to the model artists afterwards. For Solid Snake himself, Konami didn't wish for Snake to look as old as he did in his previous iterations, as that might not be such an easy sell to an audience of young gamers. As such, for his new iteration of Solid Snake in his 30s, they based his face on a young iteration of actor Christopher Walken, while his physique was based on Jean-Claude Van Damme. And this connection to utilizing Hollywood actors as a basis went back to Hideo Kojima's obsession with films. This all being thanks to his family, who made it a tradition to watch one movie a night and wouldn't go to bed until the movie was over. And with Kojima having just worked on two rather drama-focused games including Policenauts and Snatcher, Kojima felt freshly inspired to deliver a game that would play out like a movie. The plot of Metal Gear 1 and 2 dealt with Solid Snake sneaking into the then series villain Big Boss's hideouts. This time, Kojima was interested in reviving a scrap story he had planned for Metal Gear 2 that involved a rogue US Special Forces taking control of a nuke on US soil, but hadn't executed it at the time because he felt it was too unrealistic. This time, being that it was 6 years after the Cold War, he felt that enough time had passed to bring the story back. The story involved Solid Snake coming back from retirement to infiltrate the Shadow Moses base in Alaska, which had been compromised by his old Special Forces team that he had been a part of in the previous game, Foxhound, this time contending with a counterpart to him known as Liquid Snake as the lead villain. This along with a number of returning and new cast members to tell a rich and unexpected story. And so, with development deep at hand, the September Tokyo Game Show rolled around in 1996. The first one ever, actually. This had many developers from across Japan showing off their latest games in development, including Squaresoft's Final Fantasy VII, Capcom's Resident Evil 2, and of course, Konami's Metal Gear Solid. Unlike most video game trailers, this was presented very differently. In many ways like a movie trailer, with emphasis on cinematics, high quality editing, and even ending on a movie-inspired credits. A clear influence from Kojima's vision for the game. The trailer itself, however, appeared more as a concept CGI trailer rather than actual gameplay footage, as this looked better than anything in the final game, with higher poly models, lighting that bounced off of surroundings, including this highly polished glowing sword of the ninja, and the reflection off his mask at that, as well as even texture blurring. Features that weren't possible on the PlayStation at all. On top of that, let's start with Snake. The model here looking to be built at a much higher poly count, accounting for everything from his shoulder pads to even the ends of his hair being defined, rather than being flat textures rendered on top of Snake, let alone the texture quality being a lot better overall. Right next to Snake, of course, are the guards. While wearing much of what is similar, the main difference here, they looked a lot more polished, together with the amount of detail to them, unlike the final game that has them looking pretty plain and basic, almost just a mishmash of green and black. Following this is Revolver Ocelot. Outside of cleaner textures, this one stayed a lot closer to what would become the final game's version. Of course, in this version, the sleeves actually were round. Then comes our third character, the Cyborg Ninja. Now surprisingly, this one has even less changes, but this was also one of the most detailed characters in the game too. His textures, of course, looking a lot cleaner then, but what's more interesting is how his sword actually glowed back then. As a result, when brought up to his mask, you can actually see the metallic reflection off it too, which compared to the final game, the mask there looked more plastic. In fact, the whole glow effect showcases a whole other lighting system they had in mind that would naturally reflect light, whether on Snake, Ocelot with his revolver showing the metallic sheen too, and of course the ninja here as well. Top that off with texture blurring being here too. But outside of characters, there were several other major differences too, the big one being the codec system. In this instance, it required Snake to physically find a place to hide first before making or answering a codec call. This would add a much higher challenge, especially in a boss fight, where that might have been next to impossible, thus why it might have been simplified. Let alone the UI looked completely different in this build, looking more detailed with the life bar being at the bottom, and the item menu having full colored images of the weapons to access. The radar also looking more vector based and with a unique shape. Also, alert mode seems to have been done differently. Caution simply seems to appear whenever an enemy is nearby, rather than recovering from an alert. I can see this getting super annoying if it had stayed. Top that off with the main area shown off being the early Basement 12 armory floor, with its many hallways. Based on the map, it clearly had a very different layout, including this large open area that wasn't in the final game. Along with that, we see the heliport too, with the Hindy hovering over. Strange that it says escape, but the Hindy does appear as a boss fight that you do try to run from later on, so this may be what it is alluding to. This all likely running on an engine on PC at the time before being ported to a PlayStation friendly engine. Other obvious differences seen here included the lack of decoy octopus amongst the members of Foxhound, Vulcan Raven spelt as Valken Raven, a rather early and simpler version of the armory floor of the tank hangar, and the radar appearing differently too. But after that, the game was eventually converted to a proper PlayStation specific engine, and thus everything had to be downscaled to what we know. And while the Tokyo Game Show showed a rather cinematic game, the animations had been rather simple at that point. However, the plans for the final game was going to include a lot of exaggerated jumps and actions. So rather than going to someone to motion capture the characters, they opted for animators with experience in anime design to manually animate everyone. A tough but required feat here. But at this point, it was clear the game was becoming a major project at Konami, and 20 people weren't cutting it anymore. In fact, there was literally only one programmer available to work in this case. A ludicrous feat. This even leading to unintentional results, such as the camouflage of the ninja being due to a programming bug. One that did work in their favor in the end. But even so, the team was forced to expand at this point to get to the finish line of late 1997. And so, with this revamped team, they start to work hard on building the game in a proper PlayStation compatible engine. However, a lot did still change as development progressed. Starting with this early heliport, what stands out the most is the existence of this forklift here. While it makes for neat decoration, it is clearly not on a flat surface. But what's more interesting is that it moves. Was there a guard moving it? If so, that would have been an extra challenge to avoid, which would likely make people want to avoid the left side more so than they did in the final game. Along with that, a second truck was also present here too. What's interesting is that the camera appears to be controllable actually in this build. It's possible that they were originally making this with the DualShock in mind, but since it wasn't something too common at the time, maybe why they dropped the controllable camera and settled for fixed angles instead. The tank hangar is next. It appears that it may have went through two builds at least. The first is a rather smaller one, about half the size of what we got. The metal bridge is still there, but none of the doors on the left. Downstairs is a den of guards, and without that iconic tank thanks to its smaller size. The guards here look a lot like the ones from the early build, featuring the helmets and even a little bit more texture of that. The following build, however, brought it closer to what we know. The first change is the lack of the corner camera seen in the final game. Instead, what we have here is a guard patrolling, eventually swapped in with a camera that lacked a cone. Guess that was just exclusive to guards back then? As well, the elevator seems to be using a metal grating as opposed to the two solid steel doors, kinda misplaced for a place with such intense security. Going further, we get to Meryl's jail cell, which based on how Snake is viewing her doing sit-ups from below would imply that originally Snake could sneak into a room from the ground as opposed to never. The most you see of that is via the ventilation in the final game. And going even further with Meryl, it seems she actually was going to accompany you in fighting Psycho Mantis rather than be knocked out / mind controlled for it. The fight with the cyborg ninja is in a different location originally, or rather starts differently, seemingly starting in the corridor that leads up to Otachan's lab. Yes, the very hallway he killed all those guards. Clearly, Snake was going to go ham upon seeing that slaughter. A few other smaller differences include the crane missing from the blast furnace, and the radar being active in the underground passage to the communication tower. Speaking of which, Meryl is also seen here fighting along with Snake. Seems they really were planning to have Meryl a lot more involved instead of just being shot here and not doing anything afterwards. Now we also have several cut items here too. Wolf's, Huderdrig, or however that's supposed to be pronounced, MGGK2, and Steps. These either may be cut items or maybe just early names for final items. Hard to say, but for early names of final items, the scope was called the Finder, night goggles as RNPAS7, and cigs were called the Mausoleum, which is actually the brand name of the cigarettes that Snake uses. Other details are the UI, while very similar to the final games, had some differences, such as the life bar still being at the bottom, and alert mode was a lot simpler, with it just flashing red over the map with a small countdown. In relation, we can see Snake fight in these early modes, and instead of a simple low kick, would do a signature roundhouse kick, as well as seeing Snake pulling off pins off his grenades with his teeth, like a showy badass. Something Snake normally isn't. Along with that, there is the infamous C4 scene from the trailer, which shows Snake set up a ludicrous amount of C4 and activate them. In the final game, that is an impossible feat, as there is a limit to how much you can put up. And by E3 1997, the first true in-game trailer of the game was shown off, showing off a lengthy 5-minute trailer, and in Hideo Kojima fashion, showing it once more like a movie trailer. Here actually showing off various areas from all parts of the game, including crawling, sticking to walls, and combat amongst the many features. As well, we now see the final version of the armory floor. Most prominently was a number of first-person mechanics shown off too. An interesting feat, as many PlayStation 1 games at the time used pre-rendered backgrounds and made this ability impossible. But this was one game that had fully 3D areas to enable cinematic cutscenes and first-person viewing, all ending in a spectacular explosion of numerous C4 set up by Snake in the game. There were also some differences here too, including a more controllable camera, blue vision cones for the enemies as opposed to the final yellow ones, the life bar being more in the middle of the screen, a simpler radar, along with Snake's endless ammunition. While the first trailer went somewhat under the radar, this one was getting all sorts of media attention and positivity, going over the emphasis on stealth and strategy displayed in the trailer to the very fully 3D environments shown off for a PlayStation game, let alone the movie-like presentation. Kojima was very surprised by this. While his old Metal Gear games did make much of a splash in the West, this was becoming a major breakout hit for him, and so he increased his expectations of the game's performance in North America. While the game was very deep in development, and much of the game looked very close to its final iteration, the game was now delayed to September 1998, a near whole year. And during this time, a bulk of voice and music work were being prepared. The game, being as cinematic as it was meant to have full voice acting from top to bottom. A major reason why this disc was so useful here. Of course, this was also at the time when Konami wasn't exactly amazing at recording strong voice work, and so much of the audio came out as rather low quality, and even echoey, indicating that the game may not have even been recorded in a soundproof room. While the Japanese and other language voice cast was said to be credited as normal, the English voice cast was forced to use pseudonyms as it was unknown if the game was going to be allowed under the Screen Actors Guild. The only person to keep their real name in was the protagonist's very voice actor, David Hayter, a figure that only grows more prominent as the franchise grows. Meanwhile, the music of the game was being made by several in-house Konami musicians. Kojima, as with the rest of the game, wished for a more cinematic score, but with a more powerful track. And so a mix of moody synthetic tracks were introduced for stealth segments with string instruments for more tense moments. This along with high action themes for combat, along with a lyrical track to serve as the game's central song. The best is yet to come. And while development continued, constant footage of the game was being shown off to build hype around this upcoming masterpiece. By March 1998, the Tokyo Game Show rolled around, and this time the game even had a playable demo ready. And to build further upon the hype, Konami started a robust $8 million marketing campaign. These included the usual magazine and television ads, which most famously, the American one, boiled down to this.
Sir, aren't these tests kinda easy?
Suicide mission.
As well as store kiosk demos and even giving away demos of the game. Nearing the game's release, a demo disc called the Pilot Disc was released. When data mined, it reveals a lot of cut material, including several unused animations, most famously, crouch walking, a feature that would become a mainstay in the series later. For now, it might have been deemed to make the game too easy. The very roundhouse kick combo is on this disc too, but above that, it seems the opening cutscene had an entirely different camera angle to go with. Clearly, Kojima wanted to make the opening stand out with this much tinkering. As well, they were even going to give the guards actual collision. Normally, you'd run right through them, but it seems they originally would let Snake actually push them physically. Granted, they slid and not actually tumbled back, so it was unfinished. But as development was coming to a close, several more ideas were being cut. These would even include the Codec calls. The Codec calls themselves, which were plentiful and existed in many capacities, including even mocking someone for having a mono TV.
Snake, you're not using a stereo TV.
It can't be. A mono TV.
Have a few unused Codec calls too. One of these is for right after the Metal Gear fight and before fighting the final boss Liquid Snake, where Snake can talk to the Colonel about how he can't move.
Snake, great job! You stopped Metal Gear!
No, it's not time to celebrate yet. I can't move.
Snake, can you turn your neck? Take a look around.
This as such is left unused, since it goes directly to Liquid's monologue. Simultaneously, Ling also had a unique Codec call for the same section after the Metal Gear fight and before Liquid Snake in order to save the game.
Ling, I don't think I can go through all that again. Please save the mission.
Okay, Snake, I'll take care of it.
Amazingly, both were actually voiced, showing that it might have been a late development removal, but there were also two Codec calls with Master Miller and Nastasha, which were to activate if you tried to go north without defeating Psycho Mantis. Normally, there is no way north without crossing Psycho Mantis' room, so maybe he originally wasn't going to be in his room, and they would tell you if you enter that room, which would mean that something would need to trigger that fight if so. In addition, there was a single piece of soundtrack that went unused, this being an instrumental version of the game's ending theme, The Best Is Yet to Come. This was supposed to play when Meryl was shot by Sniper Wolf.
持久戦よ。彼女は何時間でも何日でも何週間でもじっと待ち続けるわ。あなたを観察し動くのを待ってる。
メリルの体力が持つかどうか。
It was changed to a more general track from the game. It's possible that this theme was originally going to be used for more serious or sadder situations before the theme Enclosure took its place, which was famously used for Sniper Wolf's death. That bringing us to the game's several unused textures, as the battle with Sniper Wolf has an actual textured face made for when Snake shoots her dead. This might have been a bit too gruesome for the game, which may be why they had her face covered with a sheet in the end. Along with that, there was a texture for an unused item box for the nuclear warhead storage building. Not exactly known what it belongs to, but it has been theorized that it might have been for the fourth scrapped cardboard box that one can take to the canyon, which even has unused dialogue referencing it.
To the canyon, huh?
Speaking of which, the nuclear warhead storage also has 2 early unused textures for doors. Possibly these existed as early as the big 1997 trailer, in which several textures remain in the data, including the original texture for the cyborg ninja's mask that was more detailed, and the original textures for the snow genome soldiers. One of the more interesting bits, however, is how in much of Snake's art, he had a tail to his bandana. Yet in-game, that is nowhere to be seen, and looks more like a headband. But seems they were actually planning to have that in-game as a single texture. My guess would be that due to the PlayStation's limitations, making it flow might have been a bit difficult. Keeping it static wouldn't look right either, or simply turning it. And considering this is a titular Hideo Kojima game, I can believe he would be that particular about how it would flow. While much of the content had been cut due to refinement, director Hideo Kojima did also have several features he couldn't get in for various reasons. So much so that he only got 60% of his ideas in. One related to the many rats that were crawling around Shadow Moses, specifically the ones in the vents, which Kojima had plans for Snake to take on as pets. What would they do gameplay wise? Hard to say, but maybe they could have been planned to distract the guards? But ultimately, his justification would be that Snake would find a fondness in them as the first life form he encounters in Shadow Moses' cold Alaskan winter. And to go further with the idea of rats, during the first Sniper Wolf battle, he was planning to even let the player shoot the rats constantly, with bigger and bigger rats coming in to take their place. But this was eventually removed, as Kojima felt the joke played out for too long. Another was his Codec support, called Mariachi, a Spanish singing battle advisor who would sing to Snake every time. Removed since Kojima found it ridiculous, as you'd have to listen to his whole song before getting the battle tip. Further, when Snake is locked up with Johnny the guard on duty, there were plans to make further use of Snake's cigarettes, which only were used for getting past lasers in the final game. Here, he would befriend the guard by giving him a pack, possibly a way to trick him to get out, which this would become an idea that Kojima would return to. But finally, a large one was an idea relating to the final turret gun battle with Liquid Snake, where originally one would be able to choose to drive or control the gun. While it would make sense with Meryl, since she knows how to use a gun, with Otacon however, he probably only would be able to drive and not much use shooting, so thus it was cut. And while Kojima wished to further implement other features into the game, including the ability to hide bodies in storage compartments, or even just further interactions with surrounding objects and environments, it was something he couldn't get in. This likely being due to a PlayStation limitation, but it also might have been a deadline issue as well. This was something that would have to wait till a later entry. The game was scheduled to release in under 2 months after its Japanese release in North America. For this, localizer Jeremy Blaustein was put in charge of this. Kojima stayed rather independent of this part, which led to Jeremy making several liberties to the original script. Some were fairly straightforward, such as localizing wireless to codec. Others made some lines sound a bit too goofy. Once Kojima learned of this, he was furious about the liberties he took, and after this game, wished to never work with him again. However, Jeremy Blaustein to this day does still believe that his script is what made the game so popular in the West, but that is something that is up for debate. Aside from the script, other small gameplay changes were made for the West too, including the addition of an extreme difficulty, a bonus tuxedo outfit for Snake, and a demo theater for viewing the cutscenes of the game. And so the game released in Japan on September 3rd, 1998 and October 20th, 1998 in North America. The game was a massive critical success, scoring near perfect and perfect scores across the board, many including PlayStation Official Magazine declaring it as the best game ever made, and winning numerous Game of the Year awards, even with competition being as stiff as they were, being that they were up against Nintendo's Zelda Ocarina of Time. While up to this point video games felt like video games, many were speaking of it almost like it was a movie, with computer and video gamers even declaring it as playing a big budget action blockbuster, but only better. Some even bringing up how it basically invented or even reinvented the stealth genre as a whole. And aside from its critical success, it was also a massive commercial success too. going on to selling 7 million copies, standing in the top 10 best-selling PlayStation games, just above Crash Bandicoot and under Tomb Raider. The Metal Gear franchise had now been successfully revived, and Hideo Kojima's name was now cemented as a top genius in the industry, along the lines of other such figures, including Hironobu Sakaguchi, Shinji Mikami, and even Shigeru Miyamoto. Eventually, the game even saw an updated version released in Japan, called Metal Gear Solid Integral. That was basically the English version with the additions it had received, but as well came with an additional disc for playing 300 extra VR missions. That disc, however, released in North America as its own standalone release called Metal Gear Solid VR Missions. The game's legacy continued on, with even a PC port coming, to eventually even seeing a re-release in a Metal Gear Solid collection on the PlayStation 2, appearing several times on PSN stores, and as of this video, even appearing on the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection. This topped with the game eventually seeing a controversial remake in 2004. Aside from the creative choices, the cut content of Metal Gear Solid came as a result of Hideo Kojima wanting to build a more fleshed out world, but hampered by technical limitations. His idea was to make a realistic and believable world with every detail in the surroundings having to matter, but he wouldn't have to wait long for that. Going back, Kojima was nowhere near as done with the series yet, as evident with the post-credit scene of the game, and as such started planning a sequel right away, with design documents ready as soon as January 1999, for Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty, for the upcoming PlayStation 2. That would be more than capable to make the world that Kojima wants, with every detail accounted for, as well as looking and feeling like a film. A game that could be said to have built even greater hype, and a game with an even larger controversy around it. A game that I plan to cover soon, so hit the subscribe button, for I'll plan to be back with more Metal Gear and other gaming history soon. Hit the like button and comment below on what was your favorite moment in the original Metal Gear Solid. So everyone, thank you for watching!